Very interesting daf in Yevomos. We talk, every so often Yevomos gives us a daf that's a reprieve from charts and difficulties, and this is a one of those dafim. We saw in the Mishnah had said that even though Beis Shammai held that according to Beis Hillel, there's a chiyuv yibum even though that Beis Shammai held that there was a chiyuv yibum, there's an obligation when there are two wives and one of them was an erva, one's not, a tsaras erva, you nevertheless have to do yibum. And Beis Hillel hold you're not allowed to do yibum. And if Beis Shammai followed through in their actions, then it would cause, according to Beis Hillel, a mamzer. And if Beis Hillel followed through in their way, so according to Beis Shammai, you would have a kiddushin of a yevama who's supposed to be yevama, but is going to marry out in the street. Nevertheless, they would marry each other. The families of Beis Shammai and the families of Beis Hillel would still do shidduchim one with another. And the Gemara begins with the concept of the machlokas about what is lusis go to do. We know that the Torah tells us in this past week's parsha we saw it that lusis go to do that when somebody passes away, you're not allowed to cut or do bodily damage to oneself for that. There's a drasha in the Gemara lusis go to do. L'sasu agudas. Don't create groups. Now the Gemara says, but we need it for don't cut yourself almes. And then it said l'sagoidu. Why said l'sisgoidu? And sisgoidu is self is reflexive. So it means don't split yourselves apart. Don't create agudas. And before we get into understanding Beis Shammai Beis Hillel and whether they followed through on their halacha or not, and in why we paskin like Beis Hillel, and did Beis Shammai follow Beis Hillel? All these questions that we have to address in the Gemara here. The Gemara says l'sasa agudas. You're not allowed to make a lisas gedu. So the Gemara, this halacha shows up, and the Magen Avraham goes at length to explain our Gemara, and the halacha is relevant from it. In Siman Tov Tzadi Gimel in Seif Beis in Orach Chaim in the halachas of Pesach. So the Seif Gimel, sorry, it is Tov Tzadi Gimel Seif Gimel, and the Magen Avraham is in Os Katan Vav, the Seif Katan Vav, the sixth Magen Avraham, and there he brings up where the Ramah brings the halacha. We know that there's a custom, there's a minhag in regards to Shavuos, in regards to the Sphira from the beginning of the count until Shavuos, to have 33 days where one would not take a haircut. And the original minhag, based on the death of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, was a minhag from the first day of Sphira until Lag BaOmer. However, during the Crusades, which happened after Lag BaOmer, before Shavuos, it happened in the weeks after before Shavuos, and many Kehilos were killed. In many of the Ashkenaz Kehilos, they moved the 33 days from Rosh Chodesh until the third day of Sivan. So from Rosh Chodesh Iyar to the third day of Sivan. So, and there's different there's a machlokas, does it need to be 33 days, 30 days, many different shitos. But basically, the onset of this change in minhag came where the Ashkenaz communities, based upon the murder of whole cities, whole towns in Shpira and Spar, on the Rhine, the communities on the Rhine that happened after Lag BaOmer but before Shavuos. To commemorate that destruction, they shifted the mourning days, the what we call Sphira, right? They moved it after. Now, the Ramah says you can do either one of these, but you should not have in one city different groups doing different things. The Ramah says, the minhag is there are those that take a haircut until Rosh Hashanah, and those people they cannot take a haircut after Lag BaOmer, even though they can take a haircut on Lag BaOmer itself. And places where the minhag is that you don't take a haircut until you don't take a haircut until Lag BaOmer, so then they can't take a haircut earlier. You cannot have in one city some people do A and some people do B. Mishum Leisus Goydu, because of Leisus Goydu, you can't have a split in minhag in different places. Now, we're going to have to address soon when we get to this in the Gemara. The Gemara already said that if you have two batei ir be'ir achas, if you have two batei din be'ir achas, in one city you have two basins. One basin says A and one basin says B. You're allowed to follow one basin. You can have different minhagim. So what about over here? Maybe there are two batei din. So must be the Ramah is talking about where there's one basin in the city and then everybody has to follow the minhag of one place. So the Prima Gadim there brings a Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam. And he says like this: you should know, Kilas is good to have a din Torah, that this prohibition of having different people doing different things in one city, it is a din Torah. It's a Torah prohibition. Now, even though the pashas you would say is that it's an asmachta, it's an asmachta because you have. The simple meaning of the pasuk is don't cut yourself or don't rip out your hair for somebody who's passed away. And similarly, the first words in the pasuk means don't cut yourself al mace lamace to somebody who died. But just like that, to have a minhag, two different minhagim in one city, it would be permissible. However, our Gemara seems to indicate that it is a d'oraisa. And he quotes it from a Kesef Mishnah that he had to explain why there's Malchus or not Malchus. So he brings proof that that's the opinion of the Kesef Mishnah. But I'd like to point out that in our Gemara, it seems that way. Because the Gemara asks a question, wait, how can you tell me Leisus Goydu is coming to teach me that don't split and have different minhagim in different places? But we needed to teach you that you can't cut yourself. So the Gemara should answer, of course, it's just an asmachta. We're just talking about a support to a rabbinic halacha. Of course, the oraisa meaning of the pasuk, the simple oraisa meaning of the pasuk means don't cut yourself for a deceased person. The mitzvah of the Chazal, when they say, Leisus Goydu, don't create agudas, that's a derabbanan. That's a rabbinic prohibition based upon that pasuk, and it's just an asmachta. It's a support for the rabbinic concept. And since the Gemara did not answer that, it seems to say that that the Torah is really saying there are two mitzvahs or two prohibitions here. There's a Torah prohibition of the simple reading, but then it should just say Leisus Goydu. Why does it say sis godu? To tell you both that you're not allowed to cut yourself, but also you can't break the kehillah apart. And that's a part of the mitzvah. Don't break the kehillah apart. You cannot have some people doing A and some people doing B. Now, Rashi says the reason for this is the last Rashi, so the first wide line on the last part of Yud Gimel Amid Beis. So Rashi said, what's the reason you can't do it? Because b'damya l'shtei Torahs, it's going to look like it's two Torahs. And you're not allowed to do it because it's going to look like you have one group doing A, one group doing B, and it looks like there's two different Judaisms, two different Torahs, two different ways of living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, normally, when we say there is a mitzvah, go ahead.
Lucky that it's only two.
Right. Nowadays we have multiple splinters. But it shouldn't look like two Torahs. Now we have a problem. If it's a D'oraisa, why is Rashi telling us the reason? What's Rashi saying the reason for? The reason is because the Torah said so. Rashi didn't say the reason for why you're not allowed to cut yourself on over a dead person because, well, you can't cut yourself because your body doesn't belong to you, it belongs to Hashem, and it's your kadosh. I don't know. Rashi doesn't say that. Why is Rashi saying so that it shouldn't look like two Torahs? Also, the Rambam in teaching this halacha of not having two minhagim in one city, the Rambam says mipnei hamachlokas, because it's going to cause a severe machlokas in town. Again, if this is a d'oraisa, why did the Rambam have to say that for? It's a d'oraisa. The Torah says not to do it. The reason of the Torah, we know Rabbi Shimon is dorish time of the Torah. Shimon, it says, look, based on what the reasoning of the Torah, it'll change the halacha. But generally, we don't say that. So what's the basis over here? So there are those that say from Rashi and perhaps from the Rambam, we can indicate and say, that this is the Rabbanan. It is not the Oraisa. But there are those that say that, no, Rashi may also learn that it is the Oraisa. Although not everybody learns the Oraisa for sure. There are those that learn that it's the Rabbanan. But perhaps what Rashi is saying is, what's the geder? What is the structure of this mitzvah or prohibition when it looks like two Torahs? Because we're going to see later in the Gemara, the Gemara says that if there are two Batei Din in one place, according to Rava, that it's going to be okay to have it. Wait, but it's still going to look like two Torahs or machlokes. It may still cause machlokes. So why, if the Torah says, let's just go don't make groups. So even if you have multiple Beis Dins, you shouldn't be allowed to do groups, one group doing one way and another group doing the other way. So Rashi is saying, no, we have to understand the structure of what is the reason for this mitzvah, and then perhaps we'll be able to understand when it applies and when it doesn't. And that's what he's saying. If it doesn't look like two Torahs, it does. So Rashi is going to have to explain that when you have two Batei Din, that doesn't look like two Torahs because each one in and of itself has a kehila. It has its own organization, its own teaching, its own followers, and therefore that's the Torah. The Torah is that Beis Din has to disseminate it, and Beis Din has to paskin, and therefore they will follow. So we'll get to that. Hopefully, get back to it a little bit soon when we talk about the concept of two Batei Din. And let's just go to do not having different groups doing different things when they're two Batei Din. However, we have to understand that there's a machlokas here as to what the basis or the structure of this prohibition is. Is the structure not to have? It shouldn't look like two Torahs. Is the structure there shouldn't be machlokas, and it may be the oraisa. At least it seems in the Gemara it is the oraisa. From the fact that the Gemara didn't answer, it's just a smachta. And indeed, as the Pri Megadim says, it seems that way in the Kesef.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Please. Gives me a chance to eat the cholent.
Yeah. Is Losis go to do the behind the reason that we avoid having on Chol HaMoed different minhagim by tefillin in the same kahila?
Yes.
Is that the same? Is all the kind of the same? That's an application of.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the halacha, and we'll talk about it a little bit soon. Hopefully, we'll be able to explain where that applies and how that applies and so on.
Could you just say that? Could you just say that the Gemara could have answered that it's an asmachta, it just had a better answer?
But it's not a better answer. It's not true. That's not the meaning of the pasuk. Let's just go to do the word sis go to do is not teaching that. It's just an asmachta. If you say it's not the oraisa, I think Max is asking a question. Maybe it's not the oraisa, And the Gemara could have said, oh, it's not the Oraisa. But the Gemara had a better answer. What's the better answer? Oh, the word implies more than one meaning. Right?
Can't we say that in of itself is an asmachta, that it has this implication of talking about a kahila also, but it's not a drasha Gemara?
Great. If that were the case, why does the Gemara continue asking, wait, but I need it for this, I need it for that? That doesn't apply. The Shaka V'Tara Gemara goes back and forth 3 times. Right? If it's not a real drasha, it's just a support for an external Rabbanan, it seems odd that the Gemara would say that. The Gemara seems to be implying that there are 2 meanings to the word of the pasuk.
Okay.
Right? You understand that? So the Gemara says that the Gemara asks from Megillah. What about by Megillah? Megillah, we know the halacha is, and we learned that in our last Masechta that we previous, 2 Masechtas ago, we learned it in Daf Hashavua. It begins with that the Megillah is read on multiple days of Nisan. It could be read based on the villagers coming into town. Now, the villagers coming into town, how can they read the Megillah on different days? After all, it's a contradiction in minhag. You're going to have some people do it on the 14th day, which is the correct day, and some people doing it on the 12th or the 13th. And that's a contradiction in minhag. And now, the Gemara says, how can you ask me a question from a d'oraisa to a minhag? These are minhagim, and I'm telling you an isser. So we see the Gemara, at least at this point, says that there's a distinction, that this application of lis is going to do would only apply to d'oraisas or to isurim, but not to a minhag. And a minhag would not be included. And that's the question of, sorry, I skipped a part of the Gemara. The Gemara says this in regards to the halach of not working on Erev Pesach. And the Gemara says, I'm telling you Isser, you're telling me minhag. Now, what we have a question that jumps out at us right away. The Magen Avram, the Ramah, in Tav Tzadi Gimel Gimel, which we just mentioned, which talks about when you take a haircut and when you're not allowed to take a haircut. That's all minhag. So based on the Gemara, you'd be allowed to. There is no question of lis is going to do on minhagim. Minhagim doesn't have a lis is going to do. Meaning you eat matzah balls on Pesach. You don't eat matzah balls on Pesach. Great, it's a minhag. There's no halacha there. It's a minhag. You don't mix your flour or your matzah with water, and you make matzah bride. So great. So 2 minhagim. There's no lis is going to do. Same for taking a haircut. You take a haircut in the first part of the Sefira. You take a haircut in the second part of Sefira. Fine. Why would that be an issue? So the Magen Avram asks this question, and he says that it would seem that we would say that at the end of the Gemara, this distinction does not remain. Not everybody agrees with the Magen Avram. But the Magen Avram says that even on minhag, there would be lis is good. However, the simple reading of the Gemara and other Mefarshim, and even the Magen Avram himself in one answer, say that no, that there would not be a concept of lis is good to do on minhag. The Shlomo Eger in the back of the Gemara, he quotes a Truvas Ginas Varadim. Also, similarly, he says this concept of lis is good to do would only apply when one holds that the other is doing an isser. What the other based in Paskin would be prohibited, and I can't allow it. I hold that's usser. But we're or it's a mistake, actually, he says, where it's a wrong shot. But if we hold, no, this is a valid way to go, and this is a valid way to go, there wouldn't be a lis is good. And therefore, it would seem that they disagree with the Ramah. And there would not be a lis is good to do on a minhag of not taking a haircut in the first part of Sefira, second part of Sefira. Because after all, everybody knows that there's a minhag like this, and there's a minhag like this. This is valid, and this is valid. It's not a question of toast. It's not a question of mistake. This is a minhag, and this is a minhag, and we know the two minhagim, and therefore there would be no no prohibition of making two different customs in one place, not like the opinion of the Ramah. And obviously the Ramah would have to hold that it applies even to a minhag. The Gemara then asks, okay, so did Beis Shammai follow through on their own halacha or not? So Rish Lakish is of the opinion, Beis Shammai never followed through on their own halacha, even though that they would have been allowed to, because that's what they held. They didn't. They followed, and therefore they never did a yibum on a tzaras erva, because according to Beis Hillel, that would be an erva. That would be a prohibited marriage, and the child from that would be a mamzer. They never did it. They did chalitza, but they wouldn't actually do a yibum on such a woman, because and Beis Shammai and Rabbi Yochanan says not true. Asu va'asu, they did, and then other things as well they did. And Tosfos asks, actually, we see many times that Beis Shammai followed through. Rabbi Tarfon, who was a student of Beis Shammai, tried to daven ma'ariv while leaning, and because at the beginning of brachos, Beis Shammai are of the opinion b'shach b'cha, Friday and nighttime Shema must be done while laying down, and Kumecha and standing, and the morning Shema must be said standing. And Rabbi Tarfon tried to do it like Beis Shammai, and he endangered himself. I guess it was traveling, and it was a danger. But and he said, I nearly lost my life because I followed with Beis Shammai, not Beis Hillel. But you see that they tried to do it. You see that they followed through. Tosfos has other questions as well. We see that Beis Shammai followed through on their halacha. In any case, that is the halacha. That is what Rabbi Yochanan says. That the Beis Shammai followed through. Now, the Gemara asks, wait, we know that there's a Baskol that came out and said the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Did Beis Shammai follow that or not? Did they follow Beis Hillel based on the Baskol, the heavenly voice that came out and said, "Oh, the halacha is like Beis Hillel," or not? And the Gemara says multiple versions. If this happened before the Baskol, so why would Rish Lakish say they wouldn't follow through their own opinion? Why wouldn't they follow their own opinion? There's no Baskol. It must be it's after the Baskol. So my time So why does Rabbi Yochanan say that they followed? So the Gemara says it could be either way. Iba say Mekadem Baskol, Iba say Malacha Baskol, Kadem Baskol, Iba say Mekadem Baskol could go into Beis Hillel Ruba, because the majority were Beis Hillel. We know this. In fact, the Gemara at the beginning of Brachos, the beginning of Shabbos, has 18 enactments that happen in the Aliyas Ben Gurion in the attic, where there was a discussion about halacha, mostly about Tumah and Tara issues, and on that day the majority were Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel wanted to leave so that there wouldn't be enough of a quorum, there wouldn't be enough to make a minyan, and Beis Shammai put a sword at the door, a guard, and say no, nobody can leave, and this way they had enough of a quorum, and Beis Shammai were the majority, and they enacted based on the majority these 18 things. So we know that generally the halacha was that Beis Hillel were the majority. Now, so the question is, if they were the majority, so how did Beis Shammai follow their own opinion? So the Gemara says, the one that says that they followed through, Beis Shammai were more supreme. And this is an interesting thing. This is never true in the Beis Din. When the Beis Din Agadol, when the Sanhedrin rules, with halacha is in the Beis Din Agadol, Acharei Rabim Lahatos, you have to follow the majority. That Beis Din, of course, everybody that's in the Beis Din is usually worthy of being in the Beis Din. They're in they're chachamim, but we don't say which one of these chachamim are greater. And then if we have a small majority on one side, and then you have a minority on the other side, but the minority are the smarter of the Beis Din, we're going to follow that. No, for sure we don't do that, right? First of all, how are you going to figure that out? But even if you did, it's not going to be a very good system. So the Torah says, you always have to follow the rabbin, regardless of whether these are machadadi tfei, these are smarter. However, Beis Shammai are holding about themselves that's true when we're talking about the Beis Din Agadol, when we're talking about the Sanhedrin. Even though Chazal applied this as well for other Beis Dins, not just the Beis Din Agadol, not for the Sanhedrin, and for other halachos, that's true when they are when they're equal. Beis Shammai held if they're mechadadi tvei, if they are smarter and they are sharper, the halacha should be like that. So then, why then is the halacha like Beis Hillel? So here the Gemara says on account of the Baskol, but actually the Gemara in Eruvin says that the Baskol was not just a general Baskol call. It said, halacha is like Beis Hillel. Rather, there's a reason over there, because they were. The reason is the Gemara says. It was on account of their midos, but not just because they were nice and sweet, but it applied to the way they interacted in halacha, because as the Gemara says, number one, that they were ma'avra midos, they would be patient, and even when they were insulted, they wouldn't become emotionally involved. Now, that's a very important part of analyzing. So this is not just a good midah. Cheers to Beis Hillel because they had good midos. It was because that allows for analysis. When we become charged and defensive in halacha, the result is that we're defending an opinion whether or not it is true. Beis Hillel, because they were mavra midosa, because they were calm and willing to be forgiving when somebody made an accusation against them or spoke against them. So therefore, they were able to rule in a calm way and analyze in a calm way, and therefore the halacha is like that. Additionally, it says over here, because they would quote their opposing opinion as well. Not only did they quote their own opinion, but they also quoted the opposing opinion. And not just did they quote the opposing opinion, but they quoted it first. So what this says is that the reason that the halacha is like Beis Hillel is on account of that they actually were able to analyze the opposing opinion. They were not being defensive and because they didn't get emotionally involved. They were mavra al midosav, which means that they were forgiving. How do you say mavra al midosav? They were forgiving when there was when their dignity, when their self was challenged.
Self-effacing.
Sorry.
Self-effacing.
No, they weren't self-effacing. Self-effacing is what I do it to myself. When somebody makes a charge against me, that's idiotic, right? So I can either respond defensively and say, wait, no, I think this is really good, this is sound and solid reasoning. Or I can say, oh, okay, you think that this is not sound reasoning. Let's analyze that, right? So that's mavra midosav. My midah, my personality should reject that and become responsive and defensive and respond to that as opposed to the content. But mavra midosav is that they went over that and they were just forgiving.
Kind of like overlook. Just
overlook is
don't
good.
even look at it. It's not important. Just pass right over it. Ma'avir. Pass right over it.
Right. They would be very forgiving and overlooking personal things. And that's
Forgiving sounds like you could take offense, you choose not to, or something like that. You could have a machlokas, you choose not to. It's like ma'avir is like I'm not even gonna go there. Like okay, you have your way, I have my way. Let's see what's going on now.
right. It wasn't even an issue. Right. Thank you, Ak. So we can read it and say, oh, this is a reward for being such nice people. But actually, it's not. It's reasoning in the logic of the reasoning of the logic of arguments. Arguments often we become defensive, and I can't hear the other. All I'm doing is I'm trying to make sure you understand. Beis Hillel didn't allow it to get to them, as Aki said. Like they went over, they were above that. It didn't allow it, and in fact, they quoted the other opinion first. So they were able to articulate their opponent's opinion. That means I have to internalize and understand the opponent's opinion before I disagree with it. And that is that's why the halachas is like them, because even though that Beis Shammai were mechadedi tvei, they were much sharper, but it doesn't mean that they were able to articulate and understand the other view, and that they were not being responsive, that they were being defensive and responsive. And this is a very important thing, because in the next Gemara, where the Gemara talks about that the halach is like them on account of a baskol, and the Gemara says, Rabbi Yeshua is of the opinion we don't listen to baskol, because as the Torah is going to tell us in a few weeks, lo b'shamayim. The Torah is no longer in heaven. The Torah is now here, and we have to analyze it, and we have to go with Beis Din. And what the Chachamim interpret today is what the halacha is. In fact, we know the story of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol had permitted cooked items that were cooked in an oven called a achnai oven. Tar nachna. Basically, the way Rashi learns is that it's made out of patches of ceramic. So where their ovens were earthenware, these were basically earthenware tiles, and so Rabbi Eliezer held that's not a vessel, and therefore it's not susceptible to tumah, and therefore even though that it became tameh, even though tumah came into contact with it, it's not susceptible to tumah, and everything that was cooked in there is going to be fine. The Chachamim disagreed, and Rabbi Eliezer, to prove his point, after trying to argue his point, proved it by moving rivers and trees and walls, and ultimately a baskol came out and said, "Why are you disagreeing with Rabbi Eliezer? Shahalacha kamosa b'chal. Why are you disagreeing with Rabbi Eliezer? The halacha is like him all over the place." And Rabbi Yeshua said, "Thanks, but no thanks. Lo b'shamayim." Nothing faced him. Lo b'shamayim. Well then, so why do we say that we follow Beis Hillel on account of the baskol? And we're asking a question. Wait, Beis Shammai, how do you? Why are you not afraid of the baskol? So, what's going on? After all, lo b'shamayim. So it's true that Rabbi Eliezer, who was at least in part a student of Beis Shammai, maybe that tells us that they held that you do listen to a baskol. Now, even though we know the halacha is that you cannot rely on halacha from a navi. A navi is not allowed to say a halacha. A navi can tell you a specific occurrence. A navi can say, in this case, Hashem wants us to not follow the halacha for one case, like Eliyahu says, we're gonna shech the animal on a bama, even though you're not allowed to once the Beis Hamikdash was built. But if Eliyahu Hanavi comes and says halacha is like Rav Moshe Feinstein and not like a Rabbi Yashav, or vice versa, we say thanks, but no thanks. A navi has no right to paskin halacha, or even to tell us who the halacha is like. So then, in Lo b'shamayim, perhaps one answer said is perhaps just like Rabbi Eliezer, who he was trying to prove it from Shamayim, Beis Shammai held that you do follow a baskel, and therefore the Gemara asked Beis Shammai, if you follow a baskel, why don't you follow the baskel that tells us the halacha is like Beis Hillel? But others say that it's not. It doesn't seem that way. It seems like that as a rule we say that ein mashgichim baskel. We don't listen to a baskel lo b'shamayim. So then why is the Gemara asking us between one type of baskel that Beis Shammai should have followed the baskel and said halacha like Beis Hillel? We don't follow that lo b'shamayim. So the Or Sameach on the Rambam wants to say that there's a distinction between what the baskel told us. If the baskel says halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer or something like that, we don't listen. The halacha is like this, we don't listen. A Navi comes and tells us, we don't listen. However, in the case of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the baskel did not tell us halacha is like Beis Hillel, a rule. Because then we would say, sorry, we don't listen. The reason the baskel said halacha is like Beis Hillel is on account of a very practical thing. They have the ability to analyze halacha because they listen. They're not defensive. They're analyzing the opponent's opinion. They can even articulate the opponent's opinion and do articulate it before they articulate their own opinion. So then we know that they understand the opposing opinion and still say this is halacha. So that's why the halacha is like that. So the baskel is not telling us halacha is like Beis Hillel on a general rule. It's saying follow them because they have the ability to analyze and to properly respond, and therefore the halacha is like that. And for that we do listen because it's not telling us a halacha; it's helping us understand who can that Beis Hillel can articulate the halacha, and therefore the Gemara says that Beis Shammai may have held fine. Well, even though the baskel says that that's a great value, and therefore the halacha should be like them, we think we're sharper. And the Gemara doesn't disagree with that. We're sharper, and therefore the halacha is like that. So in any case, we have here the basis of machlokas of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, basis of the halacha, why we follow Beis Hillel generally. The Gemara says, for one, because the Beis Hillel are the majority. In the one case where Beis Shammai were the majority, 18 halachas were based on that, because they were both sharper and the majority there. So follow it like that. But in general, we follow like Beis Hillel, and as the Gemara tells us in Eruvin, on account of that the baskel, but not really just because the baskel, but because the baskel helped us understand that Beis Hillel could analyze the halacha well because they are not they are above the attacks. It doesn't they don't take that into account. They can understand and articulate the opposing opinion, and that's why the halacha is like. The Gemara then says, they can't do agudas, that they wouldn't do, how could they do one halacha like Beis Shammai and some people like Beis Hillel? So Abaye says that because it's only in one city, but in multiple cities you're allowed, to which Rabbi says, wait, but Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were in one city. Therefore, he says it doesn't make a difference whether it's in one city or not. Rather, it depends on whether there are two batei din or not. And what qualifies as a beis din? The Mishnah Berurah says that you'd have to have 3 Talmidei Chachamim who can rule. You need to have at least 10 people come 3 times a day for minyan, and they have basic services for a kehillah. That's what defines as a beis din. So. Really, Aki, you'll remember these days back when where Keser Israel did not have minyan daily, and it did not qualify as a beis din, and therefore it would seem that there was no beis din in Portland. Everybody, Isha Yashav of Yasa, everybody could do whichever minute they want. But Keser Israel had a minute, and therefore that minute should, at least for that place, be binding. Or perhaps not, since it doesn't qualify as a beis din. It's not binding and everybody can do their own thing. That's a discussion in Allah. Taking to Joaquin's question, what about 2 people wearing tefillin in the same place? So we already saw that some say anytime that it's a minhag or anything like that, there's no concept of lisus godu or a limited concept of lisus godu. However, we saw the Ramah says it even for a minute. Here we get to another question. What about when there's a metropolis? And everybody already knows. So if it's because it looks like Shtei Toros, so in one shul, it's still going to look like Shtei Toros, and that's going to be a problem. So if we pass that the basis and the structure is like Rashi, it doesn't make a difference of whether we all know that some people wear tefillin and chalamot, and we all know that some people don't wear tefillin and chalamot. Nevertheless, you can't have it in one place because it looks like Shtei Toros, it looks like two Toros. However, if you learn like the Rambam because of machlokas, there's no machlokas because everybody already knows. Everybody already knows. Some people do this and some people do that. When Rabbi Bratkin and I came to town, Rabbi Bratkin called Rav Hillel David to ask him whether or not we struggled to get a minyan. Some people wear tefillin and chalamayid and some don't. If we would exclude the people that wear tefillin and chalamayid, we wouldn't get a minyan. Should we therefore say that you're allowed to have a minyan? So Rav Hillel David did not say on account of that it doesn't count as a base thing, but he said that yes, it's already a known thing that some people wear tefillin and chalamayid and some don't. That you can have in one base thing, in one shul, some people wearing tefillin and some don't. We can't hear you, Aki.
Sorry, in our case, the minhag was at that moment everybody would stand up and start yelling at each other.
That's also a minhag, right? There's also a minhag that everybody's supposed to say that's not our minhag.
That's right. And we honor that minhag even today.
That minhag is probably the oldest minhag and the most widespread minhag. But the concept
sometimes I can't resist. I'm sorry.
No, that was good. That was fine. And unfortunately, sometimes true. But this is based on this machlokes, we have this concept. Or Moshe Feinstein in Tshuva holds for all matters, you cannot have in one shul two people doing different things. At least not visibly. Moshe holds you're not allowed to answer Kaddish, Kedusha, anything that requires minyan, other than in the way the shul does it. If the shul says Kaddish Sfard, you have to say it Sfard. Ashkenaz, you say it Ashkenaz. And if you go to a lot of these places that have minyanim one after the next, shtibelach, right? In one shul, you have this person is the chazan and he davens Ashkenaz, and then you have somebody saying Kaddish and he says it's Sephardi, and then for Mariv, the next person goes up and davens Sfard. There's no concept of minhag. Rav Moshe Feinstein holds that that's usher. In one place, you must everything that's done in the davar shebekdusha, the meaning that it requires minyan, must be done according to the minhag of the place. And according to Rav Moshe, that would mean, and this would be because of Shtei Toros, like Rashi. And therefore, based on that, according to Rav Moshe, it doesn't make a difference how well known and spread this minhag is. Even things like a minhag, even things like the siddur, which are a minhag. To yes say this word, not say that word. According to Moshe, you're not allowed to say it in one shul. Everything has to be uniform in a shul, otherwise it looks like Shtei Toros. Others disagree, and that's what Rav Hillel David said to Psak for Portland for the shul, that you can, because everybody already knows that there are multiple minhagim, you're allowed to have some people wear tefillin and some people don't, and it'll be fine. That's a very fascinating concept because it isn't necessarily universally so. Some places they allow that, but in a lot of places they make them have separate minhagim, separate minyanim, or daven in an adjacent room so that it wouldn't look like Shtei Toros in one place for, let's say, tefillin and chalamot. But definitely over here in Kesser, you have some people daven Ashkenaz, some people daven Sfard. The rabbi davens Ashkenaz out loud. You have enough going on that this is based on this concept that since everybody already knows that there are Ashkenaz Sidurim and Sephard Sidurim and Sephardi Sidurim, it's okay to have all of that. and that would not cause machlokas. So if the basis is like, and this was what I was saying before, even if you hold it's the oraisa, the basis, the structure of that oraisa is either it shouldn't look like two Torahs, and therefore, like Ramosha says, you cannot have in one shul two different things, or the structure is that it shouldn't cause machlokas, and therefore, in places where everybody knows that's not going to cause machlokas.
You could say that the reason is that it'll cause machlokas, even if you're saying it's a d'oraisa.
That's what the Kesef Mishnah holds. The Kesef Mishnah holds that the Rambam holds it the oraisa, but the Kesef Mishnah holds it the oraisa, and the Rambam clearly says the reason is because of machlokas.
Any other Isser like that? That the Isser, the Torah says a din, and we can say it doesn't apply in certain cases because we know the reason. Like once we say it's d'oraisa, the timing of mitzvos shouldn't impact how it applies, right?
Right. That was my question at the start. That was my question. If the Rambam and Rashi are saying reasons, it would indicate that they learned that it's the Rabbana, not the oraisa.
Right. So I thought you explained why Rashi could just be explaining the reason for why it doesn't apply in certain cases, right? But I don't know. I guess
right. So that's what we're saying is that even though it's the oraisa, the structure of that the oraisa is, in other words, where does it apply? It applies where it looks like two Torahs, according to Rashi. It applies where there may be machlokas, according to the Rama, and therefore it just doesn't. You can't have two different people doing different things. To what degree? Where's the cutoff?
Yeah. Okay. Where's
the cutoff? What's the structure of that halacha? It's not the reason of the halacha as much as what is the structure. What defines two minhagim in one place, or two things in one place? Anything that nobody else knows of. That's why I said some say that it's anything that the other thinks is a mistake. But if I think, oh, that's a very valid way, and this is a valid way, that's the way the Ginos Baradim says it. So there are different ways of structuring or seeing what's the structure of this halacha. It shows up a lot. It's a very fascinating halacha that comes up. There are a lot of different things to look at here. Just Tosis on the Gemara essentially asks, okay, so how do we answer that in one city you had the Megillah being read on the 13th and on the 14th? That seems like less is good to do in one city. So actually there is a big machlokas here on what does it mean in the Mishnah in Megillah when it says that some people, the villagers, would read the Megillah on the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, depending on whether you live in a walled city, non-walled city, a villager in which Purim comes out. Who read for them? So Rashi, in the beginning of Megillah, says the basis of this halacha is because they couldn't read. They were villagers. They didn't know how to read the Megillah, so they would come to town anyhow for the market, and that's what Beis Din was. And so they'd come for the market, and as a result, somebody would read for them. Somebody that in the big city who knew how to read would read for them. So Tosfos has a couple of questions. First of all, so then it's less is good to do. But two, they're not obligated in this mitzvah. So how can they read for the person that's a villager? We know that the halacha is that somebody who lives in a walled city, and they do Purim on the 15th, cannot read the Megillah for somebody on the 14th, even for somebody that's obligated on the 14th, because he's not obligated in the mitzvah. I cannot be a shliach for you if I'm not obligated in the mitzvah. So same over here. How could the villager have the Megillah read by a city person? So some of Farshim say that for Rashi, they answer that no, that it's different because everybody that doesn't know how to read can read it earlier. Everybody that doesn't have a way to read it can read it earlier. It applies to me as a city person as much as the villager. It's just simply that I have more opportunity. But the halacha is for everybody that they can read it on the 12th, the 13th, the 14th. Others say that actually the person would read it for himself, but he didn't know how to read. So the city person would read a word and he would read it. Somebody what's the word in Yiddish? You'd say vorlehnen. You would read it before them, and then they would repeat the word. Is there an English word for that? No. Vorlehnen. Somebody would read it, sort of like the Balkore reads, and the person who gets the aliyah is also supposed to read, and they're just saying the words that the Balkore is saying. That same thing would happen for the Megillah. There are questions. Well, then maybe it doesn't count as the reader who's obligated even reading because he's listening to the words from the other and just repeating those words. However, Tosfos says no, it doesn't mean that at all. Tosfos says the person would go home and read it in his own village, and therefore there was no lissus go to do. And so this is a very fundamental machlokas, a Megillah based on this Gemara. Do we say that they would read in the same city, and then we'd have to answer that was no lissus go to do because it applies to everybody? Or we say no, that as Tosfos says, that actually they could not read the Megillah in the same place on different days. The reading of the Megillah in the same place had to be only on the day that the mitzvah is there, and the person that's a villager, his reading would be in another place. By the way, this is only true if there's no doubt. If there is a doubt, then you're allowed to do both. There's no lissus go to do if you're doing two opinions based on a doubt. And the Mefarshim proved this from Rabbi Akiva, who took Meiser on an Esrei, both according to Bisham Basil, because he didn't remember which one is the halacha. So you see that this is only in a matter of where there are contradictions and you're following different opinions. But if it's simply a doubt, I don't know which is the halacha, that's not a problem. Okay, so let's just...
somebody from the city would go back to the village with him and read it?
According to... Tosfos, what does it mean?
Meaning he can't read. So how's he going to go back to his village and read it?
Yeah, somebody would have to help him there, I guess.
So then what's the whole point of him coming to the city?
Coming to the city was to provide the water and provide the stuff that he would bring in as produce. It was a different... Yeah, they have a whole different explanation in the Gemara. The simple reading of the Gemara is like Rashi. And they have a whole different explanation of the Gemara based on the question from this Gemara. Over here, it seems like you can't have two people in one city reading it on a different day.
Another question. When I was in Eretz Yisrael for yeshiva, those of us who were keeping 2 days of Yantif would go to the Ramada Inn in Yerushalayim for second day minyanim. Is it because of this that the yeshiva wouldn't let us have a second day? I don't remember that it was discussed that maybe we could just get up early and have second day Yantef at the yeshiva before things really got going.
So yeah, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach held that in Yerushalayim you're not allowed to make what they call a chutznik, an outside of Eretz Yisrael minyan on the second day Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do that because the minhag of the place is to have 1 day. Yes, you're obligated in 2 days, but you can't make a minyan out of that because the minhag you're contradicting the minhag. Again, that would be like Rav Moshe Feinstein that says it doesn't make a difference whether everybody knows about this or not. You cannot have two Torahs. You cannot have two things in one place. However, others, like we said, disagree, and they do have constantly all over the place minyanim for 2 days. The Mir has a second day minyan. Most yeshivas have second day minyanim because they follow this idea that everybody already knows. Everybody already knows that chutznikim do 2 days yantiv. Bnei Yisrael do 1 day yantiv. This is not a novel idea. Oh my goodness, you're doing it different than we do it. Yeah, everybody knows that. Everybody knows chutznikim make 2 days yantiv. And you do 1 day yantif. This has other ramifications as well for keeping 2 days. I guess we'll end with this. I was going to talk about another part of the Gemara. The halacha is that when somebody is a ben Eretz Yisrael is in Chutz La'aretz or vice versa, they have to make it look like they are doing whatever the local custom is. So if a ben Eretz Yisrael comes to, so when I lived in Eretz Yisrael and I'd come for Yontif to my parents, so I would keep 2 days of Yontif. Why? Even though there was a ben Eretz Yisrael, but I cannot break Yontif in America in front of other people. So there's a machlokas of what the reason is between the Taz and the Magen Avraham. Is the reason because of Maris Ayin? Imagine you have Tzvi Fischer in Monsey, New York, by his parents, and it's the second day Yontif, and he's driving a car. That's Maris Ayin. And the halacha of Maris Ayin is that not only if it's done in public may it not be done, but it may not even be done in the room of a room. So I had to ask halacha, like, so how do I make Havdalah? Right? I have to make Havdalah at the end of the first day Yontif, but I'm making believe I'm doing a second day Yontif because of Maris Ayin. So I can't even do it in my own room. So you have to make Havdalah, but that's not an isser to do, so you can do it. But definitely, even turning on your light in your own room would be usher, because it's even Maris Ayin, even in a room inside a room is usher. However, the other sheet that says no, it's not based on Maris Ayin. It's based on machlokas, this same concept that we just saw. And therefore, they quote in the name of Shlomo Zalman that the halacha is that if you're in your parents' home and they know that you're a ben Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to keep 2 days in the house because there's no machlokas. Again, this same concept. It's a halacha that shows up a lot of times that since the structure of list is going to do is as machlokas, when in any time that machlokas would not apply, you don't have to do it. And therefore, even though I'd sit at the second Seder, to honor my parents, but I wouldn't actually eat and do the Dalet Kosas in the same way because I not to ruin the spirit. I may believe I did, but I didn't have to do it. So it's because it's the machlokas, because they know I'm a ben Eretz Yisrael. At the time, I was a ben Eretz Yisrael. So this is a very unique halacha. It shows up a lot of places. According to Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Moshe Feinstein, the halacha is in one place you cannot have two people doing a different minhag, regardless of whether or not everybody knows that there are multiple minhagim. You cannot have in one place two minhagim being done.
So on Shmini Atzeret Simchas Torah, it's the minhag of Chabad around the world to have a kafas 2 nights in a row, 2 days in a row.
Yeah.
Why? Because the Chaver in Ba'aretz are having it one day. They're having it on the first day. So those Nathulo go to them, and we're with them on the first day, and they're with us on the second day. So it's it's good for the vodka industry as well. But is that it seems like that's a legitimate example of application of this principle. I mean, it might seem funny to those who don't do that, but it seems like, that seems reasonable. And our community, we all know that some of us are ba'aretz to do it that way, and some of us are b'chutz la'aretz to say we're going to have one minhag for all of us that everybody's following.
Right. Normally that wouldn't apply, because if we do that, so then we would have to do many things that other communities do. Right? It's only in Simchas Torah that we do that. There are reasons, according to Kabbalah, or the Arizal, that on a basis of it's Simchas Torah, so Torah should be one Torah, whatever. There are different reasons set for that. Be that as it may, the principle generally would generally be a contradiction to the principle, because the principle generally says in one place you can only do its minhag. You cannot do other places minhag. But on Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, actually, in a lot of Hasidic communities, they do hakafas on Shmini Atzeres as well, to sort of combine and make it all one Torah, like Aki said. Anyhow, so this is a structural machlokes. Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman hold in one place you cannot have multiple things going on, and Reish Lakish, and that other poskim say that you can go in one place as long as everybody already knows. So therefore, there's no machlokas. Based on the Rambam, you can have different minhagim being done in one place as long as everybody knows, and it won't cause machlokas. Yashikah.